everybody, Anna Sabramowitz here, and today I'm testing out basically the live feature of a video on Facebook, but I'm using my phone, and I just found out there's like so many more toys on this thing. I really could jazz it up with flowers and all this stuff. Yay. Okay, maybe next time, okay guys? Seriously, it's too many features. I really like that stuff. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about today is just, I just had a really awesome strategy session, and one of the things that came out that is really evident for me is that a lot of people think that scenarios are just like one little, to be good at scenarios, it just takes this one thing, like you got to have the right checklist, or you got to have the right software, or you got to have the right template, right? A lot of people get, let's say, branch track, and they think, oh, this software will solve my problem. This software will solve my conundrum because it's built for scenarios, or it's built for conversations, and it actually doesn't work that way. You need to have these three pillars. And I'm not saying that when I tell you about these three pillars of scenario design, it's not that this is the be-all end-all of scenario design, but if you have these three considerations and you focus on them when you're designing your scenarios, then you'll actually develop a better product, a better resource for people. So the three pillars are, and I'll get into detail about each one. The first is the framework that you're going to use. The two is the interview process, and the three is the mechanics, or the assessment and the engagement strategies you're going to use to design that scenario. So there's going to be, sorry, I'm just getting notifications here, so it's completely distracting. Anyways, so the first thing is the framework. Now, your framework for your scenario can go from very simple, as in a single scenario question, to very complex, which is multiple questions. I've also seen when I was working with one of the guys at Branch Track, they showed me a scenario where the scenario actually ran into modules, where you'd have basically each decision led you into a different universe of decisions, which is crazy, but that's how complicated you can make it, right? But the distinction between when to use a framework that is very simple versus one that's more complex has to do with your subject matter, because sometimes what you're looking is for people to have simply be exposed to provocative situations and questions so that they can make maybe draw their own conclusions and then go to a place where they can discuss those things further. While in some places, let's say in a more sophisticated branching scenario, you might want people to explore a way of persuading, let's say, somebody to do something, and maybe approach that task from different perspectives, or realize that there's more than one way to approach the same situation. So that framework is very important, because if you upfront decide with your stakeholder, maybe your subject matter expert, what that final outcome really is supposed to look like and what the function of the scenario is, then that framework will be there to support you, and you'll be working against it for the rest of your project. Now, one thing that I love about even my simple framework that I use, that I discovered, is that it's not, it's wonderful because what it does is it can scale. You can start simple and then add complexity as you see the need. But in the very beginning, you have something very solid to start from, and it will serve you for probably 95% of your needs. So you need to make sure that the framework that you're using for scenarios, and I use a mix of branching plus my go-to is the String of Pearls framework, which I talk about in other videos. I'll talk about it in an upcoming one. It's a fabulous framework, and it's my go-to. So I always start with that. What are we trying to make this look like and fit into, so that we can work from there? Because when we get into the interview process, this is the second pillar. It can be very challenging if you're starting from a blank slate, because then you're not necessarily being able to guide the subject matter expert enough to give you the information that you need to make compelling scenarios. So in order to do that, you have to have the framework and the mindset of what you're actually working towards. So start with a framework, and you do some analysis up front to figure out which framework is going to work best for you. Then what you're going to do is, and keep it simple in the very beginning, because there's no need to get complex until you're proven otherwise. What I say is go err on the side of simple until it is demanded that you go beyond it. Then the interview process is very much complementary to that framework, and the way that you're talking to that subject matter expert and the collaboration that you have with that person and the amount of time it takes for you to gather that information is very much directly related to the setup that you did in the very beginning to figure out what the purpose of your scenario actually is. Now, the third pillar is mechanics and assessment. So once you've got all these things gathered, the information's gathered, and you have this framework filled in, what you can start doing is making some decisions around if somebody, like how many decisions does somebody need to make to prove to me that they're getting this concept, and how, let's say, do we want to add a score to these questions to make sure that, let's say, the value adds up to something substantial, to show it as an assessment piece at the end, or if they're not getting the score that you want, let's say part way, like a third way through, do we want to kick them out and have them start again, like we did, let's say, with Broken Coworker, where we weighted each of the answers or the options, and if you didn't accumulate a certain score, you never made it to the end, because we said, hey, we don't want you to think that this is the way forward. We want you to actually experience what it's like to have some wins and successes, and we don't want you to get to the very end thinking that you made the right decisions, because these shouldn't be the right decisions. So those are basically the mechanics, and the mechanics I marry with assessment, because a lot of times assessment to me is how can somebody on a computer prove to you that they've gained some kind of a skill. And sometimes, like, let's say if we are talking about a scenario that has to do with harassment, how do you measure that somebody's, let's say, gained some confidence in being more assertive? What is that going to look like, right? So at that point, we can actually make a decision and say, hey, let's jump on, just a question with subject matter expert and say, hey, would you say if somebody made, out of 8 decisions, 7 of them, they made the most appropriate and assertive decision, would you deem that successful, right? And somebody might say, yes, definitely. So then we'd have to decide how we're going to arrange those pieces to actually make them work. So it's not that this is a very difficult thing to do. It's actually, once you have a system and a process in place, it's not very difficult. What it is just following the steps in order, because one of the things that a lot of people do is they start right in the software. They get some ideas and they go build right away. And there's nothing wrong with building small prototypes. In fact, I actually encourage the agile kind of approach. But what you want is to have a plan first. You cannot plan on the computer, or you cannot plan alone. You need to talk to experts so that they can help you contextualize that, and then actually have a framework, basically, to work off of, to make that work. So 3 pillars: framework, interview process, and then your mechanics and assessment. And if this is interesting to you and you want to learn more about it, then just schedule a call with me. We can talk about the strategies, where you're at, where you're struggling, which one of the 3 pillars you want to kick butt in and get better at. So there's a link I can put underneath the video, and you can get in touch with me. We'll have a strategy session, just like the one I had earlier, where we really talked about, I think the person I was talking to really thought that they were lacking in one area, but really it was just the fact that the process was a little bit out of whack, and they were going to a complex framework before starting off with something easier, faster, and more efficient. So I hope you found that helpful. If you did, let me know. Give me a thumbs up, share it, and I will see you next time, my friend. Hope you have a wonderful evening. Take care. Bye. Next time I'll make it do something fun, okay? I'll wear some funny hat, digitally enhanced.